Malawi is rated amongst developing and emerging economies, with opportunities and challenges being encountered along the development path. In trying to unravel detail of possible and of course potential remedies to the challenges that are affecting the country, I caught Professor Thandika Mkandawire, who is the former director of United Nations Research Institute for Social Development and the first person to hold the position in African development at the London School of Economics. My name is Jawes Banda. Professor Mkandawire, welcome to our special interview.
Thank you very much. Thank
you.
Sure.
You're here at the invitation of CISANET
yes.
to be the keynote speaker at the 2015 national conference, which is titled agriculture, or they're talking about science and technology as perhaps the main thing which is needed for agriculture to develop in Malawi. Yes. I just wanted to find out and have perhaps a broader picture in terms of how important is agriculture and perhaps the pursuit of technology in the agricultural sector as being a driver of growth.
Well, for Malawi, agriculture is absolutely important, and the growth of agriculture has been, in the case of Malawi, very crucial to whatever progress we have made. But the interesting thing about agriculture is that, in a sense, its success must lead to its reduction of its role in the economy. That is, the more the economy grows, the share of agriculture will diminish. Mm-hmm. So it's it's almost like a self-destroying sector, that it boosts the economy grows faster, manufacturing goes faster, then its share becomes less important, which is good news. Mm-hmm. But that does not mean that agriculture should decline in absolute terms. No, it's simply that its share in the GDP should become less. And to do that, you have to increase productivity. Mm-hmm. And to do that, technology is very important.
I've known productivity to be perhaps one of the most difficult things that the agricultural sector is facing. We are talking about levels of yields being low, maybe due to a number of factors that happen to be contributory to that particular effect. What perhaps can the players within the agricultural sector do to boost productivity? Because we happen to be faced with a paradox. We've got ample agricultural land, we've got generally favorable climatic conditions, we've got plenty of fresh waters within the lake of Malawi, but still some people still go to bed on an empty tummy. What exactly can we do to boost agricultural productivity so that its role within the GDP can be really felt?
Look, I'm not a specialist on technology in agriculture, but what I heard yesterday from the technology people was lack of resources in terms of research, mm-hmm. in terms of extension services, and that what happened in the beginning of in the post-colonial Malawi, there was a policy which was to spread knowledge about agriculture to spread it quite widely across the sector by creating cooperatives, by literacy campaigns, by new technology, by spreading new ideas in the sector. That didn't last long. After 3 years, there was a change, there was a shift. 3-4 years, there was a shift towards one which was aimed at concentrating on few so Achikumbe, the two more successful ones, mm-hmm. and left the rest to continue pretty much on their own. And then later on there was a liberalization of the market, but liberalizing the market does not address the technology question. It simply makes the market open to everybody. So we don't have it. We have not yet really. And then came the fertilizer subsidy, which was a step forward, because in the sense that it increased the productivity of small producers. But it's quite clear from what I heard at this conference that there's a big gap between the productivity at the experimental stages, in Chitedze and at farm level. So somewhere the knowledge is not spread. The knowledge that we already have about certain crops is not reaching the farmers. Mm-hmm. And that can be blamed on all kinds of factors. It can be blamed on, I think, mainly extension services.
All right, maybe now you've reminded me of one thing to do with the issue of strong agricultural institutions. You've talked about issues of extension services. I want to look at one literature that I read some time back. Mm-hmm. It talked about as to why Africa in general, and of course Malawi in particular, to say that the agricultural sector at times lets us down because we've got weak agricultural institutions that support agricultural production. We also have got upside down agricultural policies. And the last thing is about failing markets, which perhaps act as a disincentive to the farmers whenever perhaps they produce in bulk because they lack ready markets or steady markets to sell their farm produce. Now, I want to look at the issue of having strong institutions and not strong men perhaps that are leading these particular institutions. Professor Thandika Mkandawire.
Well, that's the general problem of almost every sector, that our institutions are weak, and they have become weaker. They became weaker even, during the structural adjustment era. Because the structural adjustment era had a very simple story. Leave it to the market. Okay. It was much later than that they also discovered that you need certain institutions. But a lot of damage had been done. Institutions take a long time to build. If you take like ADMAC, it took years to build it and to have a capacity it had, being present in the countryside, and those things were interfered with, and we have not found yet, new institutions that can perform the same role. And Malawi is basically a market economy, but there's a difference between sort of being pro-market and trying to develop a sector. There's a big difference. Trying to develop a sector means that you have to address many things that the market cannot address. You need institutions that can ensure better maintenance of your infrastructure. Institutions that can provide credit. Institutions that can ensure that markets work, function. And those, in the case of Malawi, were weakened, and weakened further during during the structural adjustment era. And my fear that we haven't found new institutions yet. And farmers are grappling there almost on their own, when other farmers in the rest of the world are heavily supported by an arsenal of institutions that surround the farmers in
such
the
a
US.
case, what should we do, Professor Thandika Mkandawire?
We can learn from our own experiences. In Africa, we tend to forget that we have had experiences. We have had experiences with ADMACs and all that. The one can criticize the ADMACs for exploiting peasants. The institution did many things that were exploitative, but they had other functions which have been ignored, which was to secure markets for peasants, which were guaranteed. And the ADMAC was a great lobbyist for infrastructure in the countryside. They could tell that this road to this market is not functioning, and they would tell the government to fix the road. So we don't have those kind of resources. So we can learn a lot from our own experiences. Of course, we can learn from others what institutions are required. In the case of Malawi, I think one of the major sources of poverty, of rural poverty in Malawi, is infrastructure. People, we ought to make some kind of an implement a decision such as that no farmer will be, say, 10 kilometers away from a tarmac road, and just enforce that. Because people, the technology, as I said, in some of the crops, the technology is there. People can probably use, if they have with a little extension support, they can produce more. But where are they going to sell it? How can they transport it? And there is one of the things about structural adjustment is that it was not only against industrial policy, it was against all sector sector-specific policies. So we really have no agricultural policy. They have these so-called swaps, sector-wide, but this is not a policy. This is simply a collaboration by different people on a sector, but they don't define a policy. So you need to read a policy that says that for this policy, we require the following institutions.
All right, maybe, Prof, a bit of deviation from the hardcore agricultural sector. I want now to look at some of the texts that you've written, one of which is that which you call the spread of economic doctrines.
Yes.
We want to find out just a bit, in 2 minutes, what exactly is it all about, the spread of economic doctrines?
When donors provide aid, it's not only money they give you, they also give you ideas that match their understanding of aid, of development at a particular policy. In the 60s, the understanding was that we needed planning, that every country must have a development plan. So people were trained, were sent abroad to study planning methods and input, output, national income accounts, and so forth. And then they came back. When they came back, they were told, well, no, it's not. During the 70s, that what we needed was project managers. So people were trained into cost-benefit analysis and project evaluation. By the end of the 70s, they were told, no, we need stabilization. So each shift in policy preoccupations of the donors is followed by capacity building of a new generation of Africans that understand those things that donors want them to understand. And there's nothing wrong with learning those things, but the way it's done in Africa is very destructive, because it's not that you're accumulating knowledge, it's not accumulative. You're actually throwing away. Now they're saying, we're being told that we need project managers. We need project evaluation, who were dismissed in the 80s and 90s as useless. So we're going back to square one, and that's what I meant by, and that was what was wrong with the spreading. Now for instance, we're being told now that, the IMF has now changed its tune on a number of things, now arguing very strongly for income distribution as an instrument for growth. For years, they were arguing the opposite. For years, they argued that inflation was the most important target. Now, in the U.S. at least, growth and employment are important. So we have to relearn what we learned, and that's what I mean by how, if we don't have an autonomous process of learning, and education, we will be subject to these fashions and fads by the donor world.
All right, now
and we are often led, because sometimes they change, they give us the idea and then they drop it, and we're still running.
That's very true. Now, I want to look at one of the texts that I've also read a couple of times ago. It was written by a Zambian, but she's based in London also.
Yes, yes.
Her name is Dambisa Moyo.
Yes, yes.
She's formerly of the Goldman Sachs, and she's a PhD holder from, I think, Oxford University in London. She says she's written a book which is titled Dead Aid.
Yes, yes.
She subtitles it to say why aid is not working in Africa.
Yes.
Whilst the trillions and trillions of dollars have flowed to Africa, and of course keep on flowing to Africa. She argues, she says, aid has justified African governments, maybe in Malawi in particular, to say that they abdicate their responsibilities of perhaps providing public goods. You talk about education, healthcare, security, and of course infrastructure, like you alluded to earlier on. I just want to look at this particular saying to say that sometimes aid does not work. What are perhaps the dynamics as relate to aid? Professor Thandika Mkandawire.
Look, aid is a big chunk of money, and it has been known to work sometimes. It's worked in Korea. The American support to Korea was very crucial, and the Marshall Plan, of course, it worked. So it's not aid per se; it's the particular form aid has taken in Africa. And in the last 30 years, aid in Africa was not developmental. It was used for steering African policies. And funding of developmental, what was the initial purpose of aid, which was to support poor countries with the funding of large-scale, long-term investment projects, infrastructure, bridges, dams, and so forth, was stopped basically in the 80s. Most of the dams in Africa were built in the 60s and 70s. So aid in the 80s and 90s was not developmental. It was for other purposes, poverty, rewarding countries for
humanitarian aid and charity.
Charity, and rewarding countries for adopting structural adjustment policies. So one, of course, in that case, you cannot expect it to be developmental.
Exactly.
I think what has happened now, partly because of China, the East Asian aid donors like Japan, they were always aware that there was something wrong about not funding infrastructure.
Exactly.
And that the role of the state and state financial institutions are important in development. Now, aid removed all that, and so it could not be expected to lead to development. Dambisa's concern is perhaps more. I don't agree with quite a number of things of her, but that's irrelevant. But
I hope you know her.
Yes. I've actually invited her to LSE. I chaired.
Nice.
Or chaired one of her presentations. But the answer she provides is not really the answer to the question. The question is, the role of the state in development, and how does the aid community link up with this project of development with its with the local with the national projects. And to the extent that aid is the irony of it is the World Bank was created to fund long-term, large-scale, long gestation programs. And IMF is okay, I understand, but IMF was for stabilization, so you don't expect much from them. And World Bank made a mistake abandoning its own mandate. And now, actually, it's the rationale for the World Bank became difficult, to establish.
Quickly, Professor Mkandawire, you've talked about the two Bretton Woods institutions, yes. World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. Quickly, you've reminded me what the president of the World Bank said. He said that development is about resilience, and resilience is about development. One cannot exist without the other. And I remember pretty well some time back, before the late president, Professor Bingo Mutharika, died, yeah. He said, asking the World Bank, or pleading with the World Bank to say that give us a short time space of about 3 years within which we can develop and formulate policies that will restore resilience to the external shocks that the country is faced with. I want to look at the issue that you've talked about. You're talking about IMF as about an institution which is mandated to bring about stabilization, and of course World Bank, which is here to bring about matters perhaps of development. I don't know how perhaps if the policies that we are currently pursuing are those policies that can restore resilience and of course make the people of Malawi better, and of course as compared to the rest of the countries within our region.
Yeah, the aid regime in the last 30 years or so has introduced short-termism as in the policy arena. So there is no side, there's no part where you talk with donors on long-term projects. Really, it's been, and that short-termism, which was okay for stabilization purposes, has now overtaken the long-term nature of development. Development is about long-term processes of structural change. And structural change, and now there's a whole flood of studies coming out showing that structural adjustment failed on structural change because it was not addressed. Structural change is by definition a long-term process. Unfortunately, the current relationship between the national projects and donors does not have that long-term component. I think it's interesting with Bingo's point was that obviously he had a long-term view of certain things, and they were judging his programs by looking at the short-term measure, not by saying that this program that you have don't make sense in the long term. That was not the argument. So they were really talking.
I understand you.
Totally, there was no conversation. I think where Bingo probably made a mistake that these long-term projects have to take into account, of course, this short-term, the things that can mess you up. I mean, if you have high inflation, whatever, you can mess up your long-term projects. But the point he was making was important, that adjustment should be aware of the long-term project and must not undermine the long-term project. But in the area of adjustment, that was not the case. That the primacy was given to the short term, and there was never even discussion about whether these plans that Bingo had make any sense and whether the partners are coming in or not. They were so obsessed with what he was working on the short term.
All right, Africa and of course Malawi, we've lived in outer poverty for quite so long.
Yes.
We've lived in grinding and excruciating poverty. But at this particular moment, everyone will agree to the fact that we need a sharp, short, transparent and finite exit strategy to poverty. What perhaps could you say in a matter of a minute or two to say if Malawi is to move out of poverty into prosperity, this is the path that we need to follow or take?
We will have to dramatically increase our growth rate. People make estimates of 7%. Malawi should aim about 10% growth rate.
Is that realistic?
Well,
depending on the...
Look, China is doing it, Ethiopia is doing it, so it's not. Malawi has had moments of high growth. The problem Malawi has not been impossible to have. We are having high growth. We've had growth 10, 12%. The problem is how to sustain them. Okay. So they're possible. So, and two, to have that growth rate be accompanied by a serious structural change, more industrialization. And to achieve that, you need high performance in agriculture. Because agriculture has many functions, in our economy. It generates employment, it provides us foreign exchange, it's the market for our industry, and so forth. If you can handle these three, you're doing well, You will get the 10%. And as I said, Malawi has had it, but between 1960 and 1975, Malawi has had moments of 3, 4, 5 years of 7%, 8% growth rate. So it's not totally out of...
I'm sorry to cut you short, Prof, but we all know that economic growth has got to translate into economic development, which is an improvement of people's living standards.
Yes.
We are talking about moving people out of poverty into prosperity.
Yes.
Now, you're saying Malawi, I know, you also know that Malawi has once enjoyed better economic growth rates.
Yes.
But this time around, we are talking about economic growth which creates opportunities.
Yes.
To say that we need to have that trickle-down effect to the people, not an equal or not what some are calling trickle-up effect, where only the people having control of the levers of power
Yes.
are enjoying and benefiting the growth benefits of that particular growth.
Look, if you're having rapid growth, structural adjustment, structural change in terms of structural change means moving people from low productivity, low productivity activities to high productivity activities, and then you're having a dramatic increase in production agriculture, plus a fundamental story which is human capital, educational policies. You will achieve the things you want. The worst thing to fighting poverty is to be pro-poor. Pro-poor policies generally are bad policies. They're poor policies. Right? You want to create the conditions where people are being moved from the low productivity sectors or even activities to high productivity sectors. And you do that by high education, access to infrastructure, access to clean water, things that make the human life live, which enhance people's capabilities as human beings. And that's why I didn't mention the word poverty deliberately, because I think that when people focus on that, in fact, the tragedy of the last 10 years or so, or 10, 20 years, that the whole debate has been poverty. Okay. And so in the process, we forgot development and structural change and inclusiveness and so forth. I would focus on those issues that are about inclusion, about transformation of the economy, and especially dramatically shifting people away from low productivity activities into high. Right now, people are moving from agriculture into cities, which may look like structural change, but actually it's a perverse structural change, because they're moving from, in many cases, from low productivity agriculture to low productivity service in the cities. That's not structural change I'm talking about. I'm really talking about effectively. People are moving, their productivity goes up, and that's doable. It's like, it's not only doable, it's in fact the only way to go for Malawi.
All right, you're a cosmopolitan person. Yeah. You've moved perhaps and you've globetrotted. Yeah. You've been to all places. I just want to find out, when you sit on the world stage, do you think those that come to help us in Malawi come here out of guilt, or they come here out of pity, and perhaps do they really come to help us out of sincerity, or perhaps they just want to be seen to say that they're helping some country in Africa?
There are huge ranges of motives for aiding countries, from philanthropic to geopolitics. Malawi is not very important geopolitically, so which perhaps explains why we don't get much aid, but there are just so many motives. But my own view really is that don't worry too much about their motives. You worry about the use of the money that comes your way, and make sure somehow that money goes in things that matter to you in terms of priority. Because if you the motives are so many that even if you ask the people who give you the aid, they themselves sometimes don't even know what are the motives for give you the aid money. It's really controlling the accumulation process, if you like, and disbursement of those monies. We have become very passive in Africa. And somebody gives you money, you say yes. We don't worry too much about the motive, but to say that this is not our crucial or our priority. To be able to say that, that's very important. And if their motives are very good, but it's going in the wrong sectors, it doesn't help you, you know.
All right.
That's what I'm saying. So the government, we have to find ways of saying to us that this is our, and that requires some kind of thinking about the future, so that you know yourself things that you can say, these are going to, this aid is kindly given to us, but it's going to undermine our project to achieve the following things.
All right. Prof, I just want to look at 2 or 3 things before we end the program. I'm looking at the issue of responsiveness to the needs of the day, to say that in terms of Malawi, being responsive to the dynamics, to the trends of the digital world, to say that one of the things that perhaps is said to be one of the setbacks is the issue of lack of responsiveness to the needs of the day. We are said to say that Malawi is fond of doing things that were being done perhaps decades and decades ago. That's why we find ourselves to be running, but we are running on a treadmill. We're just running on the same place. So someone said the things that have changed the course of the world are not repetitive in nature. I just want to look at this particular aspect. What do you say, or what is your thought on this one, Professor Mkandawire?
I suppose if your country looks like it's stagnating, it must look like you are just repeating yourself. We should, I mean, we've got very interesting neighbors not far from here who seem to be doing quite well, say, in the digital world, like Kenya, for instance. We have to ask ourselves a question: why are we not playing a more prominent role in this? The answer, and we are an English-speaking country, so there are ways of connecting to the international world, whether it's through, being connected to some company and doing call centers and all that. Why hasn't this happened in Malawi? Why is it happening in Ghana? I'm told they say it's connectivity is poor, but I don't see it. Malawians are known, perhaps until recently, to be very adventurous people. I mean, they are all over the region. You find Malawians have historically played a very important role. Someone was telling me yesterday, argued Malawians were passive, and I said, no, well, that's not our history. The history of Malawi from Chilembwe has been of revolt and protest, and our teachers were from here, went to Zambia. Malawians were very big in the unions, in trade unions, Kadali in South Africa. So we have a tradition or a history, and we were known by the British
of not being happy with the bad status quo. Yes,
something happened that, and Malawi, for instance, was very famous for associational life. Wherever they were, they would organize themselves immediately, and I think the one-party state, in a way, smashed that the self-organization culture went down, and we have just to rebuild it.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I've enjoyed myself.
Welcome. That was Professor Thandika Mkandawire, who is the former director of United Nations Research Institute for Social Development, and he is the first person to hold the position in African development at the London School of Economics. I've been Chawes Banda. I was talking to him on a number of developmental issues. We've talked about the issue of agriculture, a bit of economics, and of course some of the things that perhaps are rocking our countries. Try to provide solutions, suggested solutions to the problems that we are facing. I hope you have enjoyed the package. Keep watching NBC and enjoy the rest of our programs.